Hello, and welcome to episode 44 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. We're here today with Carson, the national president of the League of Women Voters. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm fine, and I'm really happy to be here.
Excellent. The first question I'd like to ask you is, what are you currently doing, or what have you ever done to advance the public interest, and why?
Well, currently, I'm working as president of the League of Women Voters, which, for 96 years has been empowering people to vote and giving them information. But personally, I think the thing that I'm most proud of was my work in the California League, leading the league in its support and crafting of historic redistricting reform.
Interesting.
We really made a difference. And I personally, because I belong to the league and not to another organization, was given an opportunity to make a huge difference.
So what is it about redistricting reform that really got you going? To many Americans listening to this podcast, it's something that's somewhat wonky and far removed from their everyday lives. How is it something that you became interested in?
Well, I was on the board of directors of the California League, and periodically the cries of redistricting reform come up because it may sound wonky, but where you draw the lines depends on who gets elected. Mm-hmm. We had back and forth bad redistricting, gerrymandering when the legislature and the governor did it, and twice the state Supreme Court did it, and it was good. So we thought 2028, coming up to the next redistricting, would be a good time to try again.
Now, are we talking about congressional legislative districts?
First, we're talking about drawing all the lines.
Okay, so for the Sacramento legislature as well, the Senate
yes.
and the state. Mm-hmm. For our listeners who don't know, gerrymandering is a term that comes from Massachusetts. It's basically a term that describes the creation of political boundaries of districts that representatives represent in an elected body, and it is formed in order to favor a particular candidate. The mander in gerrymander refers to a salamander, which was the imaginative shape of the first gerrymander district in Massachusetts around Boston. So go on. So you said that this matters, and you were taking it to many different levels of government.
And this time we were able to put together a coalition that crossed the political spectrum. Mm-hmm. And not just the political spectrum, but business, labor, community groups, mm-hmm. all kinds of people. And we created a ballot measure that goal was to be fair to voters.
Fair to voters, okay.
And the political situation was ripe. Voters liked it.
Why was the political situation ripe?
We had done enough publicity about what the bad stuff that had happened the last redistricting, mm-hmm. and there were enough people across the political spectrum who remembered that and who said, yeah, we don't want that to happen again.
So this is really an issue that galvanized California voters.
It really did. And we established an independent commission. They did an outstanding job. And
now, we was the League of Women Voters or the state of California?
The measure we created.
Okay.
Created it. And people liked it, mm-hmm. and it galvanized Californians across the state to participate, and it restored public trust. Everybody said, yeah, they did a good job. I know that the districts were drawn for me and not for a special interest or a party. And it restored public trust in the ability of citizens, the commission, for instance, to be able to do a good job on an important issue, and just the trust that the people they were looking at, who were their elected officials, weren't there because somebody drew the line to get them there.
So it sounds like what you were seeking to do was create a more fair electoral system where the cause of elected officials for being elected were the votes of the voters, right, as opposed to some other cause.
We said voters should select their elected representatives. Their elected representatives shouldn't select their voters.
So how long have you been involved with the League of Women Voters?
About 33 years.
And how long would you say you've been involved in public service?
Well, from the beginning. I mean, as a League member, from the beginning, I was working on candidates forms. We were registering voters. We were going into the schools to register high school students, talk about civics. We were speaking to our city council about issues that were of concern to us. One thing, shortly after I joined, I was sent to represent the League at a hearing for the EPA Superfund cleanup. I was the only member of the public at that meeting. It was all contractors and everybody who were going to get work to help clean up the groundwater.
And you were the only individual?
Only public person from the public.
So why is that? Why did you first become a member, and then why did you get increasingly involved so much that 3 decades later you're now in charge of the national organization?
Well,
how did you first get started? Why the League of Women Voters?
I was asked.
Yeah.
That's really important. But I knew about the League of Women Voters. I was a professor of history and political science, so I knew I was interested in politics, in government. When I was invited, the League in California was studying our infamous initiative and referendum process again, so I thought, well, cool, I could do that. And so I joined. I was involved in the study. I immediately got involved in, as I said, voter information, voter service work, certainly got involved in working with my local league to address city council. It just grew.
So now you were a professor, and you're already interested in issues of political science and politics. What is it that was particular about the League of Women Voters that made you want to get involved with them? As you mentioned, there were many special interest groups that you could have joined to advocate for a particular issue. You could have gotten involved in a campaign. Why the League of Women Voters?
Well, first of all, it was not partisan. And my own political beliefs aside, I think the philosophy of working with everybody and not demonizing anybody is almost unique. It is community-based, so it gave me a way to be more involved in my community. And frankly, the League is not a single-issue organization. We do have our core mission, but we look at the whole political spectrum, at legislation, from more than one angle. And so when we think about, if we're advocating, whether you're down at your city council or the state legislature or Congress or whatever, we look at all sides. How much is it going to cost? Is this doable? Is it a bright idea that's never going to go anywhere?
So would you say that the League of Women Voters is viewed as a resource both to the public and to legislators?
Yes, I would say so.
So, you rose to leadership in the state of California for the League of Women Voters, and now you're in national leadership. What's special about the League of Women Voters California? Obviously, there's a lot of things that are very unique about California. So what is different about California's political and legislative environment, advocacy environment, the League of Women Voters in California? And then how did you handle that transition to the national scene, and what kind of differences did you encounter there?
Well, I'm a native Californian, so of course I'm going to think we're wonderful. But at least my own perspective was, yes, California is a unique political situation, and the League reflects it's rather diverse, because we really aren't a blue state, we are a purple state, which lots of people don't recognize.
For our listeners who don't know, blue is often a color associated with Democrats, red is a color associated with Republicans, purple is a colloquialism to combine red and blue to say it's a moderate mixed partisan state.
But I knew that it sounds a trite, but each state has its own political culture, its own dynamic, and what works in California isn't germane to what, the situation in Kansas or Florida or whatever. And so I just always felt maybe because I was a historian and studied the long run of history, you have to be respectful of the differences. And you shouldn't go in assuming that your way is the best.
I imagine that having success in California might have, with the gerrymandering reform, might have felt quite rewarding. And you have citizen-led initiatives that get put on ballot referendums. I imagine that becoming president of all 50 states might lead to some frustrations because you're not going to see as many successes, I'm not sure as easily, but certainly we don't have national gerrymandering reform, and that's probably an issue that still matters to you. Can you talk to me a little bit about the frustration of trying to make something national that you had success with on a local level?
Personally, I don't find it frustrating because you have to accept the fact that not everybody is like you. It is very interesting in working on the whole issue of gerrymandering and redistricting that it really is a state issue. Each state has to address it. So I found it quite fascinating in working with leagues in states around the country, learning about their own political situation, talking to them, looking at the strategies they have to adopt in order to get reform. Never mind the ideal. What do we think is the best we can get? And I find it very enjoyable.
Interesting. So you're approaching politics in a piecemeal, saying a half loaf is better than no loaf, and instead of seeking, and maybe you are still seeking in Congress a national national solution. It sounds like what you're doing is going around to multiple different states, and you're saying, let's go to state legislatures and piecemeal try to get different solutions at the state level before we try a national solution. Is that the case?
Well, I'd look at it differently. You have who draws the state lines and who draws congressional lines. Now, some states have commissions that draw state lines. They're trying now, some of those states, to extend it to Congress. But if Congress passes a law that would deal with congressional redistricting, because they can't tell the states how to draw their own legislative lines. As a practical reality, we would need to be concerned about whether that law adversely impacted states that already had congressional redistricting. It would be very hard for Congress to create a bill that would not cause somebody acute heartburn. I mean,
and is that not just true of the entire legislative process in general?
Well, yeah, up to a point, but the states that already have redistricting reform of one sort or another, with the power to draw the congressional lines, might get really upset depending upon how the law is written. It may take the way that bill would come out might not be as good as what we've got.
So it might be a backslide.
It might be a backslide.
So, and just to kind of wrap up this topic a little bit, it seems to make so much sense what you're saying, but clearly there must be strong opposition.
Oh, yes.
What is it that leaders of the opposition articulate in response to your solutions?
Well, I'd back it up a step. The power to draw legislative lines is an enormous power.
And who has this power?
And let me put it this way. Nobody gives up power without a struggle. And who has the power depends upon the political situation. Could be one party one time, another party another. It is partisan in the sense that whoever is in charge at the time obviously doesn't want to give up the power. And the group that doesn't have the power at the time wants to take away the power.
So the group,
and it flip-flops.
So the group with the power, would be fair to say, would be party leadership, and that party is using their power to draw lines to augment their strength in whatever jurisdiction they have control over. Is that correct?
Correct. And, one time it'll be Democrats, the next time around it would be Republicans.
And you'd like power to be removed from both of those parties to a nonpartisan entity.
Let me put it this way: to the extent that it is possible in a particular state, we want the power to draw lines removed from the legislature and placed into an more independent group. Now, how you define independent depends upon what state you're in.
And how have Democratic and Republican leadership in the state of California responded to the initiatives and reforms that you have pushed forward?
Well, very prominent Republicans, the then Governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, supported it.
And he was a Republican.
He was a Republican. Republicans supported it. Officially, the Democratic Party didn't like it. But unofficially, there were many, many Democrats who, behind the scenes, supported it.
Now, why would they unofficially support it, but officially either have no stance or oppose it? Why the difference?
A retaliation from the party leadership.
Interesting. So if an individual who believes something is right, they may still vote against it because of repercussions in the political arena in which they operate.
Or they could just not vote or not be there that day. I don't think it's fair to say that you're really, really bad because that's the way it is, and demonizing people doesn't count anyway. It's not useful. So it's fair. I just think it's fair to say that this is a great power, and nobody gives up power without a struggle.
So I want to talk a little bit more about Chris Carson and your struggle. So 3 decades of work with the League of Women Voters must have entailed some sacrifices, some disappointment, some successes. Why is it that you're so committed to advancing the public interest as you see fit?
Because I enjoy it.
What do you enjoy about public service?
I feel it's a place where my particular set of talents and interests are most useful. I get a great deal of personal satisfaction out of doing what I do. Some people get a great deal of personal satisfaction out of whatever they do.
Well, speak to me about those skills and talents. What does it take to be the president of a nationwide organization with 50 state chapters? That obviously is not a position that you fall into overnight, requires a certain amount of leadership. What are the skills? Our listeners may be curious. What does it take to run an organization of this size, magnitude, and prestige?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to be flip when I say it takes a really marvelous staff. And we have an incredible staff. I think it takes a personality that is willing to listen to other people. And as I say, to not assume your way is the only way or the best way. I think it takes it certainly takes a sense of humor.
How so?
Well, and you can't take yourself too seriously. I mean, people get all passionate about this issue or that issue or the other issue, and they want something done one way or something done another way. And
can you offer?
You just have to listen and then help people find the way.
Well, could you offer a concrete example of a time you said when maybe you were wrong or you were taking yourself too seriously and just had to laugh it off, or you thought that your way was the right way and you turned out that it wasn't the right way and you chose to do another path? Is there a time when you second-guessed yourself and had to have a sense of humor about it?
I'm going to go back to redistricting because, for an instance, to say, we in California think we have the perfect platonic solution to the whole problem. And we've got this wonderful thing, and we want people to do it. And at a certain point, we were working with another state on a reform package that they were involved in. And they said they wanted an independent commission. It didn't look much like an independent commission from the perspective of the California Commission. And I was all ready to say, no, that's a really bad thing. You can't do it. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. This isn't California. They know their situation. They're on the ground. And if they think that's the best for them, then it's the best for them. And, don't send the email.
Huh. So you have to have restraint. You
have to have
wanted,
restraint.
and a sense of humor and restraint. All
I
right.
would just say that anyway. Whether you're as a leader, whether you're talking to somebody, or worse, email, because don't send the email right away.
There's a story about Mark Twain where he would write scathing letters to opponents or those who have critiqued him or whatever, and then he'd drop them in the mailbox, and then years later he found out he found this huge pile of letters in his desk. Apparently his wife would go out to the mailbox after he had mailed the letter and take them out before the postman came. He was fine. He'd gotten the anger out. He never heard a response, and the damage was avoided. Is that...
Yeah. A league story about that. A very good friend of mine who is the senior policy director for the California State League.
Mm-hmm.
She writes. She gets the email started. She writes scathing things, but she doesn't put in the email address.
Right.
Too.
Yeah.
And then she leaves it in draft, and then goes back and deletes it later. Interesting.
So it's almost like I forget what the adage is, but it's basically getting something off your chest and journaling it's innocuous as long as it stays with you.
Right, and I think that's where the league as an organization is. I mean, people do get worked up.
Uh-huh.
They do vent, but to the most part, it's like, well, step back a minute and, calm down if we're talking about politics and government, and react. Think about this before you say the first thing that comes into your head.
So as we near the end of the podcast, I'd like to ask you to reflect upon all your years in service. I know we somewhat talked about this, but just how has your lifestyle changed from when you were a professor? What's the impact on your family? What's the impact on your personal life? What have you given up? And you said that you really enjoyed it, but it sounds like you also enjoyed being a professor and being a citizen activist. So what's the difference? Why are you really...
Well, you evolve over time. I had very young children when I was first in the league and juggling a job and everything. But the league was my local league was very accommodating of the fact that I was juggling all this stuff. And, people have and right now bring young children to league meetings, and nobody says anything other than, "Oh, he's so sweet," and that's okay, sweetheart. So I mean, they're very, have a cookie. So I was accommodating, I gave as much time as I was able to give, and that was just fine.
Yeah.
And as my sons grew up, needed a different kind of parenting. Were independent, I was able to give more and more time. And, really, I don't like what did you have to give up? I didn't give up anything.
Huh.
As I say, it was
evenings, weekends, you didn't give those up.
Yes, but what I was doing was so much fun.
Huh. So it's kind of, and this story, another famous Californian who entered political life later in life is Nancy Pelosi, right? She also waited for her children to be somewhat older before she rose to power. Madeleine Albright did something similarly, and Barbara Mikulski. So, as mentioned, women, because it's the League of Women Voters. One last question. As you consider, and I'm not sure if you have considered, but if you consider at some point that you will be a former president of the National League of Women Voters, and you look back upon your time as a leader of this national organization, what sort of legacy would you hope to have created for yourself and for the country and for the organization?
Well, I don't know that I take myself seriously enough to think that I personally will leave a legacy for the country. I would want to work with the League in general to leave a legacy of trying to bring back some degree of civility. But also to be a channel for people to become involved in government, to understand that government is not the enemy, to understand it's their government and they need to be involved in a part of it, and just to show people that they need to work, we need to work to make our system better.
That has been Chris Carson, president of the National League of Women Voters, who speaks about a joy that she has in empowering Americans to take ownership of their own government, whether it be national, local, state. This is our government. Government doesn't have to be the problem, but can be the solution. That that government should be responsive to the citizens, and citizens should be empowered to articulate their own voices. And for Ms. Carson, public service has not only been a calling, but has been a source of joy and fulfillment, which also advances the public good. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been episode 44 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will talk to you next time.